Hello, everyone. Welcome back for yet another episode of the objectively greatest podcast in the whole history of humanity, Armchair ESG with Nate and Yates. I'm Rob Yates, Director of Communications for OWL ESG, and with me, as always, my partner in crime. And I say that every time, but Nate, we have yet to actually commit a crime. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Very excited for today's guest, the venerable Judy McNary. Judy is, and I'm reading here because there's a lot. I tried to memorize it. I do my prep work. Just too much to learn. So, an avid scuba diver and skier, passionate about striving, and this we've discussed this some, for a balance between preserving the environment and still maintaining business interests and also being able to have a good time. But here are the list of things you have been on. Director of Corporate Responsibility at Mercer. You established the firm's award-winning program for sustainable growth and development based on UN Sustainable Development Goals. You led its ESG and sustainable investing programs, published numerous articles on ESG reporting requirements, governance, risk, and how the effective integration of these issues across an organization can enhance company performance, and I have seen some of these. Currently involved in research on companies leading their industries and transitioning to more sustainable business practices. You've been in the Wall Street Journal, Kiplinger's, Money Magazine, and the U.S. News and World Report. An adjunct faculty member at University of Colorado Leeds School of Business, serves on numerous advisory boards, including one I know of that's looking to help preserve the oceans, which I'm interested in hearing a little more about. Oh, is that the Coral Reef Alliance, I guess?
That's Coral Reef Alliance, yep.
So that's I'm very interested to hear more about that one.
Imagine a world full of color, where vibrant coral reefs thrive, surrounded by a clean ocean teeming with life. Coral bleaching, caused by rising sea temperatures, is erasing the colors of our oceans, leaving behind lifeless landscapes. Coral reefs play a huge role in the overall health of our planet, and we simply cannot survive without them. The good news is, our research has shown that corals can adapt to climate change if we let them. Coral reefs aren't just nature's marvels, they're fundamental to life on Earth. They provide shelter to countless species, protect our shores, and support coastal communities, not to mention the billions of dollars they contribute to the global economy. So we refuse to accept a colorless world. Support our work, and together we will repaint our oceans with healthy, vibrant reefs, because life is better in color.
And a scuba instructor, which is interesting. Maybe Nate, we'll have to make a trip to Colorado. We'll business expense it and go get some scuba lessons there.
Where do you scuba in Colorado?
We scuba wherever we can. So
Okay.
It's reservoirs and quarries, but we do have a really good aquarium, so you can dive with the sharks in Colorado. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. My family's big on snorkeling. We love to snorkel. We've done it all over the place. So, and my brother-in-law and my in-laws are scuba certified. So, but I've just never taken the plunge. I wanted to, but just ran out of time one summer. So yeah, we should go to Colorado. It's a great
thing to do with the kids. It's a great thing to do with the family. So
it looks amazing. So yeah, I'd love to do it sometime. So
Charlotte actually has a not big, but surprisingly big scuba industry. Lake Norman is this massive man-made lake, and the nuclear plants that power Charlotte, their warm water lets out into Lake Norman. So you can go scuba and practice in warm to temperate water any time of the year. And in the winter, it's really popular here.
Huh.
Very nice. That would be nice. When it gets cold here, we get on a plane to go somewhere to dive. Yeah.
Don't blame you. Yeah, well, to be fair, cold in Colorado and cold in Charlotte, North Carolina mean two different things. It's 52 here, and there's people outside in winter jackets and hats. So
okay, yeah. That's different. Yeah, that's still shorts weather here. Shorts and down vest.
All right, that works. Nate, does it ever get below 80 where you are?
Oh, this week, so it's dropped in the 40s this week, which is interesting. Whoa. Last week we were up in the 70s and 80s, it's in the 40s, and the next week we jump right back up into the 70s. So, I'm getting. My wife had the flu last week. I'm starting to get the flu. I think it's just the temperature changes.
Allergies weaken,
yeah. It's just crazy. So I prefer the warmer weather. Like I went to college up in the Midwest in Wisconsin, and did the whole ice fishing and all that stuff. And so I like to stay down south in the warm weather. So this is as cold as I want it to get for me.
Fair enough. I'm a cold weather person, but my family
Yeah.
isn't, so I lose. So, people who listen know we like to open talking about the weather because it's always such a good segue into weather, into climate patterns and how we are influencing climate patterns. And today we are going to discuss why leading companies, big companies and smaller ones too, to be fair. I mean, when we say leading, we're talking about leading in ESG, but why they remain focused on sustainability and ESG related initiatives. And the very first podcast we ever discussed, the very first article I wrote for Al was, what is ESG and why is it so polarizing? And it's time to stop politicizing ESG. That was over a year ago. It feels like things have perhaps accelerated. And we've even seen some of the pushback, some of the investors pulling back on the ESG funds, some of the companies pulling back on at least the outright calling it out sustainability initiatives. Some of it's getting worked into real strategy and goals now. But Judy, do you think this is a trend? Are we seeing something here, or is it a fad? Is it shifting? What's going on?
Yeah, it's been a rough year for ESG for sure. I do not think ESG is a fad. I do think, and I think I'm excited to kind of talk with you more today about that and why I feel we can all put that idea to bed. It's definitely acquired a bit of a negative connotation in the US this year. Thankfully, it doesn't seem to be global. I've been out of the country a fair bit this year, and nowhere else that I've been had any sort of negative connotation with it. Everyone else is just moving forward. And I've been to Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and some places in Asia, and there was none of the negative or the politicization of it in those places that I think we've seen this year. I think thankfully, there's been some other more recent news, and I think it's no longer today's biggest headline. I think it's fading. The polarization of it, I think, is fading a little bit. One of the things I think that's happened in the US, though, is that, when you ask people specifically about what they're upset about with ESG, I think you find pretty quickly that they generally don't even know what it is. So if you ask, does it seem reasonable to have a way to measure a company and its risk exposure to environmental changes or social changes, they'll say yes. Then if you ask if it seems reasonable to know if a company is well governed, key to kind of understanding its risk exposure, they'll say, well, yes, of course. And so if you think it seems reasonable to compare one company's risk exposure to another company's, one of its peers, people say, yes, that seems reasonable. So those are all the things, that's ESG, so you get a strong yes if you break it down into what ESG is actually doing for business and for us as investors or prospective investors. I don't know. I've joked about ESG needing a rebranding maybe, or some really slick marketing campaign to come up with a new name and clear up the confusion. But I will say, when you break it down, when you get past the name or the initials, I guess it is really, companies feel that ESG metrics are useful to themselves, useful to compare them with their peers, and useful to investors who are looking to get optimal performance. So I don't think it's a fad. I think it's going to only get bigger and better.
So I love the way you frame that. Nate and I talk about this a lot when people say they're ESG or anti-ESG in sort of the popular narrative. It really comes down to, like, do you have any idea what you're talking about? And we like to take it to the extreme. So on the one side, if you're anti-ESG, would you be okay investing in a company whose primary and sole business operation was slave trade? Because that's ESG. It is. It's an extreme example of it, but it is. And on the other side, if you are gung-ho ESG everything all the way, net zero by 2030, well, okay, would you be okay if we just stopped using fossil fuels tomorrow? Because the implications of that are the human suffering would be beyond imagination. What ESG is, that we argue on here, is like a practical way to approach real problems. It's a consideration. It's something that should be incorporated, and there's upside to it. Sometimes there's big upside to it, and I think that's some of the stuff we want to talk about today. So I guess the question I'm trying to frame is, we are seeing a lot of companies take this. It's not ESG and sustainability as a separate bucket anymore. This is part of company strategy now. Do you think that's going to continue, and why or why not?
Yes, I think very much it's going to continue, and I think it's going to expand and grow, because I think we're still in the early stages. There's a lot of learning that's happening within companies and across industries. One of the things that you just touched on really is that the principles and the concepts of ESG, those are based on sound business practices. It's efficiency, it's risk reduction. A company that embraces ESG considerations, and actually incorporates them into the strategy, not just talking about it, but actually incorporating it into the strategy. They've gained a lot. They gain reputational advantages, and they demonstrate, nimble market responsiveness, I guess. But there's a lot of operational efficiencies and cost reductions, and really they're avoiding a lot of the significant downsides from failed security or regulator oversight. So they're a stronger, more robust company for incorporating this into their overall strategy. I feel, in a nutshell, ESG is good for business. And I think if you break it down, you can look at, for example, environmental, examples of where environmental metrics can show a strong company versus a weak company. There are a lot of companies who are switching their fleets to electric cars. So Amazon, Duke Energy, Best Buy, Hertz, across all industries. Really easy. Total cost of ownership is 15 to 25% less, according to McKinsey. So good for the environment. You're using less fossil fuel, and good for business. You're saving money. Very, very pragmatic example of how paying attention to that E metric can improve your company's operations. When you get to S, S is the social, and there's a wide range of metrics that fall into the social category. And this is where things really differ too, depending on what industry you're in. But health and safety in general is something that's important to any company in any industry. Diversity, gender equity, living wages, these are all examples of things that you can measure to get a higher social metric, and they are good for the company. So, for example, Mercer Advisors, where I worked for years, had a very strong program called Investors, which was the mission from the CEO of that program was to get to gender equity in terms of our client-facing positions. So really creating more opportunities for women in the financial services firm, across the firm. And the results that we look at with that, the program started in 2017, and I think parity was reached about 2020, 2021.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And it from top down, leadership on down, all levels of the company. And the company's grown tremendously. And so it's not a zero-sum game. One of the things people worry about with gender equality, gender equity, is that, you're taking a job away from someone else. Well, if you're doing well and you're growing, and this is creating more opportunities for everybody, it's not someone taking a job away from someone else. There's plenty of opportunities for good qualified people. So again, I think it's been great for business.
Well, you make a really good point there, is that it has to be done right. So I very much recognize the arguments, especially in the S, where, this is just virtue signaling. This is meaningless stat. You're rubber stamping or checking the boxes. And we should be talking about that, because it's a real risk and it's a double negative. It hurts the business, and it's detrimental to trying to see some real social progression. On the flip side, so for example, if you have a bank and it's nothing but white guys that work there, it doesn't mean that someone who is Black or Spanish or who's a woman is going to walk in and not want to go to a white guy for help. It's more that there's this sort of little that's kind of interesting. Whereas you walk in and you see, they say representation matters. And I think it does, because it's like, hey, we're paying attention to everyone. We're willing to consider everyone. One of the places I saw this was Bank of America did this outreach to Hispanic and Latino communities. And they brought in more people from those communities in the marketing department. And it's not that you have to be Hispanic to be able to market to the Hispanic community, but it helps. I mean, it certainly gives, you've had a background there. You sort of, you know what the concerns are, what the driving forces are. And they had this like fairly significant increase in mortgage rates go up in the Hispanic community. And it's just like, that was a simple one. That's an easy win.
Yeah, it's really including. It's taking a look at who your audience, who your customers to, and creating opportunities for people all the way around. I would love to think we might reach a point where we were colorblind or culture blind on things, and we aren't there. But creating opportunities for people, I think can strengthen companies, and there's a lot of data that supports the idea that when you have a diverse workforce, you get different opinions and you get better quality decisions because you've got different perspectives that are all weighing in, and you end up at the end of the day with a better quality decisions in a lot of matters.
Well, and you mentioned culturalists. So like, Nate, I know you've worked in more countries than any other 5 people I know put together. How much have you seen like the difference in sort of cultural sensitivity and understanding little things, little nuances, like the right way to talk or not eating first if you're not supposed to? Like, some of that stuff really matters in some places.
Yeah, I think companies that have, especially a global footprint, need to take this into consideration, because you have the culture of, where people, are from, but then you have corporate culture as well, right? So both are very important. And so if you have people that are both versed in the corporate culture that you're in and the culture of the country that you're doing business with or operating in, it absolutely helps in piercing through some like misunderstandings or how to be more efficient, right? In some cultures coming out, we Americans are very forward, right? We get straight to business. A lot of the world is not like that. So you need to find people that can tend to be more patient and do 3 or 4 hour dinners, and and they're doing just as much work. Like and I always joke with my American friends. You joke with the Europeans about having these 3 or 4 hour dinners, but you guys go golfing for 4 or 5 hours and do the same thing, right? You guys are
That's
talking business, talking contracts, right? So I know what I'm going to say is I got to go golf for 4 or 5 hours. But I'm in Europe, I got to sit for dinner starting at 8 p.m. and go for 3 or 4 hours, right? And so it's being versed and really having the respect of the country you're in and understanding how they do business really goes a long way into getting, because at the end of the day, you want a solid business relationship with the people that you're serving or the people that you're selling to. So yeah, so diversity is not just color or all that. It's culture. It's all of it. And you really do need to take into consideration. I've seen deals blow up because, man, they just didn't take that into consideration, and that's really important. So yeah.
So when we were in China, this was a while ago, but China's an interesting country because the business culture has advanced a lot, but a lot of the traditional cultural norms remain, and so there's a lot of sort of getting comfortable with the idea of women being in charge. And my wife ran the office in Hong Kong, and they would have these big annual dinners when factories they worked with successfully passed audits. But it is like the idea of serving a woman alcohol was like really foreign to them, so to speak. But they wanted to like show her the honor of like, we've passed this audit. So I would have to drink. And it was the weirdest thing. Like they would come up and they'd put the drink down, and it's like the status is very big there. So it's really expensive liquor. I'm like 26 years old. I know what I'm drinking. But I would have to pour a little more for myself because it's like I'm taking the extra hit. But it would start like as soon as the highest ranking person would do it, then the next person. And so then we get to like the 12th person in an hour. And I would go to my wife and be like, you got to get me out of here. Like, I'm going to be throwing things through the window in 10 minutes. Like, this is crazy. And then she'd be like, "Oh, well, that's good because we have to meet them for breakfast at 7 in the morning." I'm like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "I'm not getting out of bed tomorrow." But
Yep. Yep. So Judy, I have a quick question for you. I've asked this of previous guests. It's not as though ES&G hasn't been around for a long time in different manifestations, right? So governance, right? Right after Enron came through, you had, was it Sarbanes-Oxley that came out of that, and OSHA for health considerations has been around for a while, right? And environmental aspects have been around for a while. Is it because the combination into ES&G has just caused such a lightning rod? Because taking them just separately in the pillars, you don't see as much. I mean, I haven't really heard as much backlash, but just squeezing them together, that's where I've seen people. And I think the question is, does that give an opportunity for people to just label things in a very simple way? That, we humans love simplistic answers to things, right? So ESG is bad, or it's the best thing, versus no, you got to take a closer look at what you're trying to do. You may disagree. You might be a different shade in the E side than in the S side or in the G side. But really what it is just a framework to help people. It's a decision-making framework to help people get better results, both from an environment perspective, economic perspective, and a stakeholder's perspective. So does that make sense? Do you think it's a combination of all those that's caused the lightning rod, or what is it that that happened here?
So I feel like, I mean, a lot of it, I think, the ESG, the use of the three terms and the definite, the decision to be E and S and G, I think it's a little clunky, but we've had it now for decades. So, but I think the origins were really to try and give people ways to assess and measure companies beyond looking at the P&L, beyond looking at the balance sheet. How does company A compare to company B? When we take into account these different metrics, and those metrics are not the quarterly reporting kind of metrics that we have with the P&L and the balance sheet, right? So these are longer term. How do we know that if you're doing this for the long, you're implementing this new program for waste reduction or something? How do we know over the long run that was how are we measure how we're getting toward that? And that's where the ESG metrics really, I think, for a lot of people started to make sense, because you're making investment decisions and you had information you want, and it's not available from standard, GAAP accounting statements. And so ESG was developed, the metrics, the scorecards were developed to measure those types of things. I feel like part of the the pushback or the negative sense of it, because I think your points about OSHA and Sarbanes-Oxley, it's true. But I feel like, I think it's another way to hold companies accountable to those and to make it visible. So for example, if OSHA says you've had this many fatalities in a year versus this other company's had no fatalities in a year, you're in a very dangerous industry. And that's something that having the ESG metrics, measuring that and seeing progress over time. Maybe it's bad right now, the mine wasn't safe. And if there's improvement, then that is something I think that's of value, both to the community, all the stakeholders, community, employees, as well as shareholders.
Yep.
Following up on that, we say ESG now, but it was ES and G, so it's environmental, social, and governance. But I mentioned that because I remember thinking of it as environmental and social governance. So the big umbrella is governance, the way a company is run, and that's sort of the tone from the top, the rules, the restrictions, what matters, what are our priorities, and then environmental and social were important, like, pillars of that strategy. Poor governance can sink a company very quickly.
I think governance is really the most critical one for the success of a company. Yeah, we have, as the poster child, the Equifax breach, right? So I think it was 2017 was the actual data breach, but
Would it take 6 months before they announced it?
It was several months. They discovered it in July, announced in September.
That's right. Okay.
You think
3
about
months.
Equifax and you think about what metrics would be most important for a company like Equifax, because that's who, if you've ever applied for a mortgage or a car loan or any kind of job, whether your credit worthiness. I mean, Equifax has all your data from like the dawn of time. If you missed a payment when you were a college junior on a small credit card, that still shows up on your credit score for forever. So for Equifax, it was really egregious, what the breach, because the way it came about was in 2016, MSCI, very well-known ESG ratings agency,
Yes.
identified that Equifax had severely inadequate measures in place to protect data, all that data, your social security information, your addresses, your phone numbers, your credit history, everything from cybersecurity risks, or they also had no way to respond to cybersecurity attacks. So MSCI gave them a big fat 0 and took them off the ESG Leaders Index.
I didn't know that.
And the board and management, I mean, what would you have expected them to do? They did nothing. They did nothing.
Oh.
They made
not even a press release saying why they think it's
nothing
wrong.
happened. And then the following summer, then in July,
there it goes.
The breach occurred, and then they actually made it public, announced it in September. So that was over 140 million consumers. So almost, half the United States population was affected by that really poor governance. Stock price plunged. It was 141 a share in September before they announced, and then it dropped to $93 a share.
Yeah, I remember that a lot.
Yeah, it took years to regain that loss of wealth, and then thousands of employees lost their jobs. So to me, governance, that's just the governance. You can't underestimate the importance of good governance, because there should have been action between the board of directors and management to address that issue when it was first brought up.
So something
Absolutely.
that go ahead, Nick.
No, it's absolutely. I think governance is absolutely key. In my prior life, I worked in the compliance space, and that's like KYC, know your customer, and anti-corruption. And one of the terms we used there, the 3-letter terms, was GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. And governance was a huge part of that. That how you run a company and your controls in place flow directly to the risk and how compliant you are. And in this case, it was banking and financial services, but it was the same idea of who are you banking, what are they doing, the risk of reputational risk. If you're banking somebody that you shouldn't be banking, can take a hit on your bottom line. So really, there's not a lot of difference between that and then the ESG side. So yeah, it's been around in corporate America for a long time. So I think it's just getting over the E, S, and G, those 3 letters, because it was pretty much the same thing in the compliance space and banking. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the 3 letters, with the backlash, I think we've all seen companies are sort of shifting away from. They aren't necessarily touting it at ESG so much right now. They're focusing on sustainability, using a slightly different term, and if that makes it easier for them to avoid backlash for doing what they're going to be doing anyway, that it's fine. It is. Yeah. It's silly. I think it's going to continue to fade in terms of the backlash against ESG, because I think slowly people will start to see that it's just the things that you were saying, Nate, that we're already doing in so many ways with compliance. We all want, safe work environments. We all want these things. And this is our way to have some transparency and see that that's what's happening. And I think one of the other aspects of it too is it's a way to show improvement.
Well, it's something Nate and I have discussed on this podcast a few times now, is stop thinking about it as ESG or its corollary, stop thinking of quote unquote stakeholder capitalism and just think of it as good long-term strategy. And I think that's something you get into, Judy, because you've talked about just the importance of governance, and the two particular elements of it are risk and innovation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the things it's looking at really is what risks are there in addition to the risks of not being able to pay back a loan, or the risks of not being able to sell enough of your widgets, and the traditional, business risks, but being able to understand kind of the other things that might come hit me hard from the right when I'm so busy looking left. Getting a broader view of what the risks are that surround our business. And one of the things is that CEOs, management boards, they're looking beyond a specific election cycle or 2 election cycles. They're planning their strategies for longer periods, and that's where I think ESG really plays a big role. Because with respect to the risks, I mean, some of the obvious ones, climate change, environmental risk, biodiversity loss. If you're a company that's involved in taking up large swaths of land, you have to look at the impact of that. We look at like mining companies, for example, energy companies. So in the U.S., I don't think anybody's still investing in new coal plants. I'm pretty sure that's kind of something that, even though some people may still want to grow the coal industry, I think the companies that are in the coal industry are also looking at ways to get into other renewable energies and cleaner ways of operating. Mining companies, for example, I recently met someone who is the newly retired head of, he was the head of the ESG division at Newmont Mining, which is headquartered.
Oh, wow. Wow. I know Newmont very well. Okay.
Yeah. And, Newmont is a company, had a horrible reputation for a really long time. And they made sustainability, ESG, part of their core values and strategy. And so it's been transforming. And one of the complaints I hear from people is that it's really hard to do this ESG stuff. It's hard to get the data. It's hard to do that. Well, Newmont Mining did it. And it's a really complex global company. So if they can do it, they can figure out how to do it. I think just about anybody else can too. And so they are really focused on incorporating truly, legitimately, the ESG throughout the business. And they look at the materiality. So in that business, it's focusing on minimizing environmental impact, safety, obviously, health, safety, biodiversity, and nature is a big component for them of what they're working to make sure they don't just if we are mining and we're destroying certain parts of the habitat, how can we restore that? And then having good communications with their communities that they're operating in. So Newmont has a long ways to go. There's still some dark spots with respect to labor and some other areas, but I feel like as a mining company, they've embraced it fully, and they're a better company for doing it. I think the culture has become really strong at the company because they're so transparent about this.
I feel like when we talk about the pushback, the politicization, like people say you can't both sides an issue, and it's like you absolutely can both sides an issue. If you want to solve a problem, you have to understand what both sides are saying. It doesn't mean someone's right necessarily, but you need to understand their perspective. And I think that when you look at a company like Newmont that's trying to make changes, it doesn't happen in 3 weeks. Like, this is a big, long process with massive implications around the world. But we had Ed Apsion a couple of weeks ago. He is the head of sustainability, or co-head of sustainability at CIBC. And he and I were reminiscing about our time together at ISS over a decade ago. And one of the big problems that we discussed in 2010, 2009 was mountaintop removal mining, which was like, I mean, it's exactly what it sounds like. Just whoosh, knock the top off and start. And the biodiversity impact and the sluice, it's an environmental nightmare. and people got involved and started saying, hey, should we be doing this? Turns out it's not just really bad for the environment, it's a more expensive way to go about doing things. And you just don't hear about it at all anymore. And certainly some of it has been the lower demand for coal, but there's just other better ways to produce these energies. And that's where governance comes in. You talk about risk and you talk about innovation. That's a perfect example. The risk of mountaintop mining removal had just, it's off the charts, because you're looking at lawsuits, you're looking at fallout, you're looking at people turning to other companies. Meanwhile, innovation comes in, and so we turn to natural gas. So fracking, I know fracking is controversial. I think fracking is controversial because people don't really understand fracking. There are good ways to frack and there are bad ways to frack, and this is more innovation. And I'm not sitting here saying we need to be fracking all over the place, but there are responsible ways. There are fluids you can use that are not dangerous and harmful, so you're not turning on the faucets and setting your thing on fire. You're not lighting rivers on fire. And even if some of these innovations serve as stopgaps as we bring more clean energy, more safe ways of producing energy on board, that's helpful, because you look at the situation in Europe where they shut down a bunch of nuclear plants, and then next thing you know, they're refiring coal plants with coal that they have to ship in from Russia in an emergency, and that sort of defeats the entire purpose of what they were going for.
Well, that's what I think what Judy was saying, is being able to have a framework so when I'm looking left, I don't get hit at, to the right. I like what, that's a great and great way of phrasing it, is because I think we feel that way sometimes. You're so focused on this issue, you forget about the issues that are the proximity issues around it, and that can whack you. So I think that was very helpful to say it that way. Is this allows you to see it, from a high 30,000 foot level, and then drill down specifically into different areas and see if you have a holistic approach to doing business. So I like that. I thought that was a good way of saying it. So
yeah, I feel like it makes you look at things. Yeah, we need to be looking, in order to be successful with climate change, with changes in weather patterns, whatever you want to call them, with a whole lot of the global issues that we're facing, in order to address them and in order to come out, to sustain our planet. I do think we need to be looking beyond the quarterly results and looking beyond our narrow focus, our internal or just outside focus. Yeah.
Well, along those lines, maybe we can detour just a tiny bit, because in terms of environmental risk, we think about climate change, certainly a big consideration, but there are a lot of other ones. Nate and I talk about plastics a lot, but water preservation is another huge one. And I know you've talked about it, Judy, but what I really would like to talk about, you mentioned biodiversity. You have expertise in coral reefs that few people listening are going to have. And I would just love to hear you opine on that a little bit, sort of the damage we're doing and where we should have some hope.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yes, no, coral reefs are near and dear to my heart as a avid scuba diver, an instructor, and we're losing species. We're losing our biodiversity around the globe rapidly, and between warming waters and the changes in pH, it's a really hard, and overfishing. And then you throw on plastics. I mean, we aren't sitting in the, few of us get to go under and see what's happening beneath the surface on oceans. And I mean, I have video from, say, 10, 12 years ago from certain dive sites. And I have video from maybe a year or two ago where you can see the degradation of the reefs and the loss of fish biomass. But so one of the things I've been involved in is, I'm on the board of a global nonprofit called Coral Reef Alliance, Coral for short, and we're focused on
what's real quick. What's the website? Give it a plug. I'll put it up on the
coral.org. Okay. Really easy. Coral.org. Thank you. Focused on there's some just very fundamental issues that we can address without even fancy high technology solutions. So we've done a lot of work in Honduras, we've done work in Hawaii. There's a lot of work that we've been doing for a while, and we're going back to Philippines and Indonesia this year. But the reefs, we need coral reefs to support the fish.
Coral reefs cover less than 1% of the ocean floor, yet support over 25% of all marine life, making them not just vibrant ecosystems, but the beating heart of our planet's biodiversity. The grim reality is, these ecosystems are in crisis. Coral bleaching, fueled by rising sea temperatures, threatens their very existence. Our research shows that corals can adapt to climate change if we let them. When we secure clean water and healthy fish populations, coral reefs are more likely to survive a bleaching event. So that's exactly what our alliance is doing. Join us. Support our work now before we reach the point of no return. Because if corals go, we go.
And we also need those reefs and the fish to support the communities that are along the coasts. And one of the key, most fundamental things that's alongside, the warming waters and the changing pH is cleaning the water, making cleaner water in the ocean for the reefs. And that way, when we have cleaner water, they're more resilient. The corals can fight back a bit more. They can have time to adapt as the water gets warmer if the other conditions are good enough for them to do so. So we've been working with coastal communities and helping get wastewater treatment in place and really helping manage fishing. And some of the solutions are pretty amazing for how impactful they are, given that there's not really a lot of technology or cost required. But just for overfishing, having different periods of the year where certain fishing areas are, closed off and patrolled, so that they are truly closed for fishing, and giving people other protein sources. So we've helped set up help build chicken coops and get people eating, chicken for a couple months a year to let the reefs rest and recover. And the results from that type of work are amazing. It's just really surprising. It's not that hard. If we could just do it, the oceans can do a lot of recovery for them. They can do a lot for us to recover if we give them a chance. So Coral's been involved in a lot of doing research on figuring out which species of coral are more adaptable to the changes, as well as what we can do along the coastal communities to help make the reefs more resilient and lessen the impact, the stressors that are coming from, the human population, so that we can, make the economy in the communities stronger and make the reefs survive and thrive. I mean, that's the goal. So
last time we talked, you because I didn't know much about this, and you taught me a few things that I found really interesting. So one, when we hear the reefs are depleting, it has sort of less to do with the total surface area, or what you will, of the reef, and more to do with the fact that a lot of species of coral are dying out. And when you say you're looking to see which ones are staying on, it's like, well, why is it that this species is able to adapt and that one isn't? But there's massive biodiversity impacts. And the other thing you taught me is that I knew warming waters mattered, but I always thought it was that caused more carbon absorption, which raised the pH, and that affected the coral. And in fact, the temperature very much matters too. And it's not that it's necessarily killing it directly, it's that it makes it really susceptible to some of the diseases coming in.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about your own body, if you go and you do some, exercise, you run a marathon, then you go to run a marathon. I mean, your resilience is low.
Not me, but
okay, before lunch, right? You just come out. But I mean, we're any creature, right? There are certain. Nate, you mentioned, maybe I think I'm fighting off a cold or flu here. When we're a little bit vulnerable, if we're already recovering from something and then we get hit with something else, just as people, it maybe hits us harder. And so the same thing happens with corals and with fish and everything in the ocean. So
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
It's on topic, but the Great Coral Reef, right? Is that the one around Australia?
Australia, the Great Barrier Reef. Yeah.
The Big Barrier Reef. Sorry,
The
not the
Great
Big
Barrier,
Coral Reef.
yeah.
Sorry, Great Barrier. So I hear about that every once in a while. How is that doing? Because I know that was dying off a little bit. Didn't Australia go in and put some measures in place? Is it coming back?
It's not very healthy. I mean, yeah, there are
Yeah.
spots that are doing all right, and there's a lot of work.
Okay.
Australia is putting a lot of resources. You know, there are a lot of scientists and oceanographers and people wanting to save it, but fish population's way down. A lot of species are vulnerable, and one of the things about the ocean ecosystems, just like on land, you do need a certain amount of biodiversity for the ecosystem to survive and thrive. So if you get down to one or two species, and those are the ones that are the most, rugged and they can withstand anything, things will kind of linger on, but it's not going to be a healthy environment. So the Great Barrier Reef needs a lot of TLC, and
Yeah, biodiversity is crucial. Have either of you seen the video of when they reintroduced the pack of wolves in Yellowstone and what it did?
No.
Mm-mm.
All right, it's like 2 minutes. I'll put it in right here.
1995, 14 wolves were released in Yellowstone National Park. No one expected the miracle that the wolves would bring. It started with the wolves hunting deer. This led to a rapidly decreasing deer population. The wolves' presence also made the deer avoid parts in the park where they were an easy prey. Thanks to the deer's absence, those parts started to regenerate. Forests of aspen and willow trees started to flourish. That's when things really started to happen. With the trees and bushes came more berries and bugs. As soon as that happened, various bird species started moving in. With the increasing tree population, also another species was attracted. The beaver, previously extinct in the region, moved back. And the dams they built provided habitats for otters, muskrats, and reptiles. The wolves also killed coyotes. And as a result of that, the numbers of rabbits and mice grew, which meant more hawks, red foxes, badgers, and weasels in the park. Even the population of bald eagles and ravens rose. But here's where it gets really interesting. The wolves changed the behavior of the rivers. With more balance between predator and prey, came the possibility for other species to thrive. There was less erosion because of increased vegetation, and the riverbanks were stabilized. The channels narrowed, more pools formed, and the rivers stayed more fixed in their course. So the wolves did not only transform the great ecosystem of Yellowstone, they also changed the park's physical geography. Share this link if you think nature is incredible.
They introduced a pack of wolves. They cut down on the deer population. The deer population got healthier because they cut down on the sick, the infirm, the aged. Trees started making a comeback because deer weren't grazing them to the core. It redirected the river in a more natural way. Fish populations went back up. Just one pack of wolves being reintroduced to this area, and all of a sudden it's flourishing in ways it hadn't in over a century. It's the little things. So I've been having some arguments with people lately about how important climate change is. And one thing I like to ask is, okay, what percentage of our atmosphere is carbon dioxide? Most people don't know they're 5%, 7%, and it's 0.04%. At 0.02%, plant life dies out. But at 0.06%, you start to get runaway heating. Like, these are really tiny things. That's why when we talk about a 2-degree change, it sounds small. It's not that big deal. It's 2 degrees, No, that really, really starts to matter. But we're seeing all these positives. So we talked about risk. We haven't gotten into innovation. And I know this is something you're also big into. So I said, give us some reasons for hope. So looking back, 50 years, 30 years, 15 years, 10 years, we have an entire, it's not jobs, it's a whole new economy built around some of these innovations. What are some of the things you're seeing that are driving these changes?
Yeah, it is funny. I mean, when I think in general, people feel like change is hard, but it's actually just change. I think change, we shouldn't be putting judgment on whether it's a good change or a bad change. It's just change. But, because yes, if I think about what the work environment was like when I graduated from college, there's very little that we do now that is the same as what we did then. So there's just this constant thing. I think one simple thing that we take for granted now, I think, is that electronic documents. Think about the massive numbers of trees, the ink, the shipping, the handling, the print, all of it. With companies like DocuSign that make it so that instead of going to the mortgage office and signing the stacks of paper that are 4 inches high and wishing your name were shorter, and
I've been there.
Right. So I was like, oh, why did I put my middle name in there? So that's just a really simple example. And now it's something that you get the file, you can do it in the comfort of your own home and read it at your leisure and sign it accordingly. So a real simple thing like that, simple sounding in practice. A lot of technology had to go in, obviously, to make it secure and efficient and all that. But it's a huge innovation, really. It's transforming the way a lot of businesses are done. There's and it kind of affects things on different levels. 3D printing, AI, these things are changing. I just saw they're making houses in Texas out of 3D printing concrete. It was on 60 Minutes.
Boats too. Did you see the boats part?
The which part?
They did a boat. It took 72 hours.
No.
5,500 pound schooner. Yeah. I saw the thing you were talking about and started looking into it.
It was interesting. It's interesting. I mean, concrete is it's not environmentally friendly. So it's a step, but because concrete requires a lot of, it's one of the big pollutant materials. But, we're not going to go back to caves. And so let's figure out how to make green concrete. So they're working on green concrete.
Haven't they done concrete that absorbs carbon now?
They have concrete. No, you pump some carbon in it so that it's less.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so things like that are coming. And obviously, some of the obvious things like with electricity, with cars. I mean, there's a lot happening with the energy transition, shifting to renewable energy, in all different ways that we can do things, large and small. So, I also feel like, in a whole nother industry, to throw another one in here, you mentioned water resources earlier, Robin. The beverage industry, you think of Pepsi, Coke, Anheuser-Busch, they need a lot of water to produce those, beverages that we're drinking, but also they waste a lot of water in the production of that. And so here in Colorado, I know there are certain breweries, microbreweries, that are doing some innovative things to make the beer using a lot less water. So
okay.
Yeah, that's something everyone can get behind, right? Water is a scarce resource in and of itself. So being able to just like oil, just like everything else. So we need to be smarter about how we use it.
Very interesting. Well, okay. So we looked at risk, we looked at innovation. It's clear the market is moving in this direction. Regardless of where the polarization takes us, maybe it brings us kicking and screaming, but it's bringing us there. What do you see are the big hurdles right now?
So with respect to ESG, I feel I think the polarizing nature of it, I think that's going to fade away. I don't think we'll be worrying about that a year or two from now. I really think that will be gone. So I don't worry about that. What I think about with the fundamentals is that ESG helps companies understand where they really are, understands what the real risks are, whether we're looking left or right. And it gives them a new way to figure out, well, how can we do it different and better? And how can that pay off? So it gives investors transparency, shareholders transparency, it gives all the stakeholders, lets everybody see what's going on. The issues to me really are that we have a ways to go with the data quality and the reporting. It is cumbersome. Companies are doing it successfully. Companies are putting resources into it. I think we will be reaching a point where it's less cumbersome and more automatic. And so it will take less energy, less work to report. Because right now, a lot of the sustainability reporting that is happening is great. It's good quality and companies are getting behind it, but it takes too long to get all the information. It may take 4 to 6 months, and then you've got half a year to take a look at what you got and figure out what I can do with that before you have to go back into a reporting cycle again. So it's, sifting through the kitchen sink, I call it, of, reporting and really understanding what's important. It's kind of one of the things I think OWL has, a really key role in all of this, is to help make it simpler, because people don't want to be, if we can make it easier to get the data we want, be feeling good that it's accurate. It's hard to get the right data, and being able to
Then you're not wasting resources chasing it.
Confidence in it, that's going to be really valuable.
Yeah. So thanks for plugging OWL there. I was going to do it anyway. So thank you, Judy, for doing that. But yes, we are, definitely talk about innovation. We're using AI to extract data from disclosures, bringing that into a structured environment and allowing clients to take a look at that. But also we're giving clients the ability to go in and attach their own information and their own data points that we may not be covering in order to expand their view around the ESG data points. So we're excited about that. But one of the things too, so we are leading out on the data quality side. We've been talking to clients there. There's always issues that you're trying to deal with, whether in reporting the correct data, but also one of the things that's emerging is what are the guidelines of giving company credit around their data? So for example, net zero commitment. If they said they had a net zero commitment in 2021, but they didn't, and then they had a target year, but they didn't mention in 2022, do you give them credit for that? So it's things like that we're starting to talk with our clients around about. Just because they didn't mention it in 2022 doesn't mean they don't have a net zero commitment. They do. They just didn't mention their reporting. So there's a lot of nuance around that we're working through with our clients, and excited to get into there and go, man, how do we not just get the accurate data, but keep it up to date and fresh? And what does that mean? Right. And you're right. It's all over the place in the industry. So I think some consolidation and rules around, I think that's the next point with the SEC. Some rules around that will be very helpful. What are these rules? Where do you give them credit for data that they may have mentioned, a year or two ago? It's still in effect. They just haven't mentioned it in their latest report. And how do you go and deal with that? So there's a lot of these issues that we're tackling head on here at OWL, and I think we're making good progress. So,
I do think too, in 2020 and 2021, a lot of companies, well-meaning, not fully understanding how hard certain things are going to be. I think they jumped in pretty heavy and made commitments across the board, on diversity and on inclusion and environment and all that. And one of the little pieces of backlash perhaps for ESG this year is that some of them have not delivered on those. And I feel like it's caused an awakening to say, wow, people are really listening and watching and seeing what we are doing. Let's get serious about this. So rather than just have it be this, marketing splash, we've got it covered, we're going to do this. What I think companies have found is that people want to see, so how are you doing on that? How are you doing on that commitment you made? Where is it? What are you doing? And in a lot of cases, the data, it's hard when the data, you can't get it like you think you can.
Yep.
I mean, I led the carbon footprint project at my last company, and there was data that we didn't have. And you were supposed to go back 3 years and we didn't have the data. But what we learned was this is the data we're going to need going forward. So, the first few years of a company doing these things, there's going to be gaps. And then you take that opportunity to fill in the gaps. And that's where the quality starts to get really good. And the companies that have been at it a while have amazing sustainability reports. If you, take a look at them, I mean, they really are tracking things very finely and making really, you can see where the impact is happening.
You mentioned the market. I always think of, and I mean, the market is a huge term and as nebulous as ESG, so in some ways, but in the ESG market, there's sort of three components. There's the corporate business component, there's the investment component, and there's the consumer component. And I think where ESG can be useful, companies can show the progress they're making, which encourages investors to put their dollars into those companies, but also encourages consumers to vote with their dollars, either with the companies or with the investment firms that are backing those companies. I think, and Judy, this is something you have relayed to me many times, and you've certainly made a believer of me. That's where the metrics are so important. You've got to know what you're investing in, otherwise it's sort of superfluous waste of money. It's not really driving things. We are coming up on time, and I wanted to end with one slightly more personal question. So I will say this: the ocean is near and dear to me. When I got engaged on the Outer Banks, I've been to the Outer Banks every year of my life. I told my wife I will work as hard as it takes to support our family. My only stipulation is that we retire on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. I will formally invite you, Judy, if you want to come do some work on the Outer Banks. We'll get a house. There will probably be some of that beer. Maybe it's sustainable, maybe it's not at that point. But my question is, what can because it can be overwhelming as an individual trying to work against some of these massive forces. So what can we do to really work to support the resilience of the oceans?
Resilient. So
I know that's a big question, but
that's a big question, and I have a really clear one. The easiest answer is if we could dramatically shift away from single-use plastics. And thinking about microplastics and all that. The organization we're working on Reefs Clean Water, but we know others that are very involved in and part of it is that's our expertise, and others are involved in plastics. So as an individual, an easy way is to make some simple decisions every day. Simple decision: do I need that plastic? Does it need to be plastic? Because it does go into the ocean. And that's a reasonable thing for anybody, whether you're in Milwaukee or you're on the Outer Banks, or whether you're in Colorado, you're thousands of miles from an ocean. I do think that's a really easy thing. And I certainly use plenty of fossil fuel products in my life. So I'm not suggesting that we immediately ban fossil fuels. I get it. That doesn't work. But to me, the single-use plastics is a luxury I do not think the planet can afford.
Good answer, and you're right. It's an easy one. There are so many things that can just be replaced with, and honestly, you don't even need to use plastic anymore. There's aluminum options, there's glass options, stuff that's not just more sustainable but better for you, because plastic, for those who have not watched our plastics episode or read the articles, it mimics certain versions of estrogen in your system, and it can wreak havoc on your endocrine system. Those microplastics are dangerous.
I think what it does to the poor fishies and the micro, and the turtles and all the things. No, they're not designed to be able to process it. So, yeah.
Yeah. So the coral.org, check that out, guys. And then
thank you
I think
so much for that.
The ocean cleanup too is another site that we talked about in the past. And if you just a really quick summary, it's a boy called Boyan Slot. At 16, he went scuba diving in Greece, and he said he saw more plastic than he saw fish. And that led him to start a company, and that's grown to what it is now. So go check out, that website and all the cleanup they're doing around the world, in rivers too, as well as oceans. It's pretty mind-boggling when you see just the pictures of how much plastic these guys are cleaning up. Yeah.
I was about to say, Judy, we got to get you back, because we could do just a water episode. We were chatting about the Chesapeake Bay, which I guess you were in Delaware, and I grew up right near it too. And there's been some progress. There've been some setbacks there. But that water, the bay, the rivers, the oceans, that's where everything starts. Everything starts, and it feeds back into everything. It's the food sources. It's the entire North Atlantic jet stream. It's everything.
It's
unless we
economy,
escape
it's
the
our personal,
planet.
yeah, the water is so important to us. And so, I mean, at all levels. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Judy, I can't thank you enough. We appreciate the
Having me.
insight, the expertise. Oh, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here. Before we go, do you want to plug anything else?
No, I thank you guys so much for Coral for
Mm.
letting me talk about that. It's near and dear to my heart. So, and I really, again, I mentioned it, but what you're doing with OWL ESG, that is one of the areas that has been hard as someone who's evaluating investments to try and get the right data. And it's exciting to see how AI is a cool part of that.
We love to hear it. We're happy to be part of it. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I'm Rob Yates, Director of Communications. For complaints, feedback, hate mail, whatever it may be, communications@owlesg.com. Remember to like and subscribe. Until next time, this is Armchair ESG with Nate and Yates.